Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Tēnā koe. So, item 16, sorry, not 16, this is item 15. We've got 14 minutes. Now, that doesn't mean we have to do it within 14 minutes because this year our work program is so important, but I wish to get through item 15 before we break for lunch. So I'm going to move this particular item. Can I have a second? Councillor Cooper will second this particular item, and it's on the table for discussion. Tēnā koutou, and I'll get, to introduce yourself and the team, please. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. Catherine Martin, Manager of Work Programs and Community Facilities. Here with me today is Rob Cairns, Head of Asset Management and Investment Programming, and of course, Taryn Crew, our General Manager, Community Facilities. We also have a team behind us as well. We have Paul Kleinak, General Manager, Technical Services, INES. Also like to acknowledge Ross Roberts' involvement and also Mace Ward. Robert Walsh and Jonathan Hope, our Regional Work Programme leads, are also here today to support us. So I'm here to present the Community Facilities Regional Work Programme. Our team is. Would you like me to click from here or? Great, thank you. No, we need to do that. There we go. So just a reminder today, our regional work programs and what they include. Firstly, we have the Regional Renewals and Development Area, Regional Parks, Holiday Parks, Botanic Gardens and Auckland Domain. Other programs include cemeteries, our residential and commercial leases. Then we have our 3 programs that are also involved with local boards, and those are coastal renewals, slips prevention and remediation, and our growth program, or local parks and sports field development. But we'll explain that a little bit further here. So we have, in terms of decision making, just a reminder that those regional park and cemeteries budgets are solely governing body decisions. However, the coastal, slips and local parks and sports field development budget, or what we call our growth budget, have dual decision making. You are the decision makers, obviously, as the PACE committee under the governing body for the prioritisation of allocation of budget and effectively outcome. So you're setting the overall scope for those projects and programs. Subsequently, and sometimes in parallel, local boards are the decision makers where those assets lie within local areas, within the parameters that you set. So for example, in the growth program, if there was a sports field upgrade to be funded, you would determine that project and the outcome and scope, and the local board would be overseeing the delivery and look and feel of that project. So just a few key points today in relation to the item in front of you. So the program has definitely been aligned to the LTP budgets and priorities. We've worked quite closely to do that. It's a 3-year work program, so we approve 1 in full and years 2 and 3 in principle, and we'll come back to you with a rolling work program each year. You may recall that this program was workshopped with the PACE committee in March, so that would have been the last time that you saw the program in full. The Growth, Coastal and Slips programs have been workshopped with the local boards, and I'll go through that again slightly more closely shortly. And the local boards approve the work programs, those Growth, Coastal and Slips items, as a part of the overall work programs, and that just happened at the end of June. That's all subject to your approval. Through that process, they also provide feedback to you, and that feedback has been attached to the report here today. Any recommended changes have been included. There were some minor changes and they're all reflected in the attachment. So just this final slide to outline the development process in a little more graphic way. So firstly, we have the PACE committee workshop that you had in March to review the programs. We then had the growth, coastal and slips items that went to local board workshops in March followed by local board workshops again, just for final oversight in May. Local boards have adopted their work programs in June, including, and subject to your approval, those Growth Coastal SLIPS programs, and we're now back to you today to approve the full regional work program, both the solely regional and the dual decision making yesterday. So we're happy to answer any questions, unless there's anything anyone wants to add. Right.
Oh, the hands are coming up already, so geez, you fellas better watch out. Councillor Coombe and then Councillor Walker.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou. I appreciate there's a lot in the work program, and this question's a bit lazy web, sorry. In terms of, well, it seems anecdotally there's a lot more pressure on our campsites at regional parks, and this is the time of year where there's I get a lot of feedback about how difficult it is to use the online booking system, and I just wondered, within the work program, is there any budget for looking at the back end of systems that we're using to support the bookings and, you know, try and improve that whole experience of booking campsites? And I think one of the particular issues is you can't book, if you're trying to book say a week and it's just at the point where the bookings have opened, it's really popular, you have to do it one day at a time, so you have to keep going back in every single day. It's not like the dockside where it opens for the season. So I know that's a very specific question, but I just couldn't find it anywhere in the program that there might be some budget to just resolve this to make it a better experience.
So thank you for the question, Councillor, and I'm going to answer that because it's not quite in the scope of this team or of this work program, but certainly trying to use our digital tools better to improve the customer experience is one of our key priorities, and our digital and customer services team is looking at this. So we're trying to improve our digital experience overall. We've got a number of initiatives that we're looking at, and the booking services is one of those. We're now trying to prioritise for this financial year and get the budget approved and sourced for how we're going to tackle these items. And once we know a little bit more, we can provide an update on this item. But we don't quite know yet of the start time at this stage that I'm aware of, or the total budget, but it's certainly on top of mind of how do we resolve it.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me go a bit off-piste. I was just taking advantage of a work program generally question. Thank you.
No, that's all right. When I saw A to F and I tried to merge them up, I didn't see it. Councillor Walker.
Just got a few high-level questions that go to climate change. So I noted the holiday parks were doing various works, some demolition, reconstruction, toilets and so on. Don't have an issue with that. But given that those holiday parks are generally in very low-lying areas, highly likely to be impacted by sea level rise, storm surge and the like, are we shifting to portability in terms of building structures so that if we have to shift something, we can either shift it up or shift it back or shift it away?
So Paul's here can possibly talk about the coastal risks in those sites. Where we are investing in our accommodation facility, they are generally movable items. Where the less movable items are the amenities blocks and the showering blocks, and that's generally a refurbishment of the existing footprint. So there is a longer term risk associated with that investment, but it is that long term.
And just as it goes to that, it's becoming evidently clear that we're not looking at long term now. I mean, we're tracking worst case scenario for sea level rise, for example, dramatic acceleration. So storm events and the like are going to become much more frequent and far worse at these locations imminently. So I've just got a concern that we're taking the appropriate steps. They're not necessarily more expensive, it's simply a more appropriate way of doing things. Thank you.
Kia ora everybody. Through the chair, just to add to our answer there, Council is doing quite a lot of work in improving our understanding of climate change and some of the related impacts of climate change. We've talked to the ECC committee recently around some of the work that we've prepared in the erosion susceptibility space, so looking at the changing nature of our coast over the next 30, 50, 100 years' time, some better and more accurate overlays and data that relate to flooding and coastal-driven inundation flooding. All of that work is being factored into any renewals that council undertakes. When we look at the consents and approvals that are required, we also need to look at the hazard provisions of the Auckland Unitary Plan and build that into resilience that's wrapped into future design.
Right. The other question I've got, and again it just goes to resilience and climate change. I noticed that we're buying 3 electric bikes for the south. That's great. Generally, in terms of the acquisitions that we're looking at for plant and equipment, and that would include, say, the winter garden boiler. Are we future-proofing ourselves around climate resilience?
Yes, we most certainly are. It's a key consideration in any of the renewals we do, and in particular the winter gardens is something that we're looking at to look at alternative solutions there.
The other general question I've got around that, I notice that we're continuing to invest in livestock. Probably the most rapid thing that we could do to reduce emissions as council is to reduce livestock in terms of methane emissions, which are relatively short term. Is that something that we are exploring? Are we looking at maybe shifting from a ruminant-based livestock regime to some other regime?
I think those are issues that are coming up, particularly through the Regional Parks Management Plan, where most of our farming takes place. The extent of the grazing that we undertake to manage those landscapes, and the alternative approaches to livestock and stocking rates that we could do. So they're being worked through, and largely through the Regional Park Management Plan and through the environmental plans that have been prepared for each of those main sites.
Okay. The reason I'm introducing that is if we start approaching worst case scenarios, and my view is that is occurring, we may have a need for a much faster response than what we may be thinking of around that. So I'm just bringing that to your attention. The other question I've got is just around Collindale Park. I note that there's a substantial sum of money being invested there in a kart track. Have we consulted and engaged with affected parties around that? And I'm thinking in terms of the Mount Wellington Motorcycle Club and others that have in the past enjoyed the Mount Wellington racetrack, which of course no longer exists, and the pressure at Rosedale racetrack, for example.
Yes, I'm not intimately familiar with the discussions that are ongoing around that kart investment. That you'll recall that project for Collindale is an investment that was agreed pre-COVID, and this is the continuation that was deferred through the emergency budget. So this is the continuation of those landlord improvement works. I am aware that the team involved and our PSR colleagues are continuing to have discussions around kart provision with the various user groups and organisations that want to make use of those facilities.
And that'll sit with Mesa's team, so.
Maybe if somebody can come back to me offline and just, give me some information around that. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Watson. Oh, sorry, Fletcher, then Councillor Watson.
Thank you for the report. I could go into a number of issues here and ask you difficult questions that if money weren't in short supply, would you be looking at renewals of regional parks, or would you be looking at more sports fields, or quite what you would be doing? And I would highlight the fact that there's nothing really explicit in terms of costings around sports fields, and we will receive lots of correspondence on them. The question, however, bearing in mind all these things being rather difficult, is with the delegation that you're seeking for approval of changes to the work program so that these matters don't have to come back through the PACE committee here, what comfort can we take that the evaluation of all of these things is going to be properly considered?
I guess just to highlight the nature of the changes that we do under that delegation are very sort of minor things to, you know, a little bit more money here, a little bit less money there, little shifts in timing of budget. So we don't ever substantially put a new project in or take a substantial project out without seeking approvals. And it's really the delegation allows us to flexibly have sufficient flexibility to deliver the program without having to come back to the committee for every little change that we
No,
need.
that's fine. And also, what impact do you feel you've been able to make thus far within Council's policy development on developer contributions?
So we work very closely with our colleagues in financial policy. Clearly, there's a number of issues around our approach to development contributions that aren't simply what we would like to achieve or what we would like to deliver, but around the organisation's financial capacity to borrow, financial capacity to fund depreciation into the future. But we work very closely with our colleagues. The DC policy is obviously going out for consultation shortly, and the scheduled projects for the open space are reflected both in the short-term growth program and our longer-term growth modelling for need. So we think we work well with them.
Would you agree then that the provisions that have been made available to us thus far are somewhat conservative in terms of open space and sports fields and, you know, everything in an ongoing sense of what will be required for our communities if we are to remain the wonderful, livable, most livable city in the world? Are you comfortable that we should be adopting conservative provisions?
I would make the observation that within the LTP, the 10-year LTP program, there is, we believe, adequate budget to deliver our modelled requirements for both new open space and development. Equally recognising that the 3 years that we're dealing with here are relative to the rest of the LTP, relatively constrained budgets. And that's the reality of the world we're currently in. So while we've got modestish budgets here for the next 3 years across the LTP, and certainly when you look out at the latter years of the LTP, there is a great deal of money.
And can you also confirm that with regards to holiday parks and bookings, much of the problem is just oversubscription rather than technology problems?
I don't know quite what the level of use of the regional parks is. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Councillor Watson.
Yeah, a couple of questions on the regional coastal renewals work program, and firstly, thanks for the program to date. You know, I've certainly noticed quite a lot of work happening the last little while in the area I represent, so it's always quite uplifting to see that work getting done. It's actually the sort of work that often strikes a chord with local communities more than anything, actually, so things getting fixed up close to where they use. My question, however, just going to the timing of the project's completed, estimated completion date, and the total cost that's predicted for it. Just a general question: how kind of tied down are they generally? And the reason I ask that is certainly with COVID there was a couple of delays. There wasn't too much that could do with that, but in terms of that effect on the overall cost, you know, obviously if it delays a year or two, it seems to increase the cost, you know, sometimes quite dramatically. So I realise it's a guide, but how confident, Rob, are we that, you know, that's the general costs we're working under and the kind of general time frame for completing these projects?
I'll just quickly answer. Paul may well want to add. So you're quite right. What these reflect is our current best estimates based on the amount of knowledge we have for each of those projects. And it's very fair to say, as you advance through the project delivery program, you get much clearer idea of what the actual costs will be. And for coastal projects in particular, there is the potential for those budgets estimates to change as you know more about what you're trying to solve. What we will always do with each of these programs is manage each of the projects within the overall program envelope. We aim to progress so that we're delivering as much as close to 100% for each program each year. But if we have to just flex the timing on some of those projects to accommodate an increase in budget, that's the type of the way we manage budget changes, variations.
Mr. Chair, if I might, in terms of the coastal renewals work, we know that there seems to be more storm surges and things like that. Are we seeing like a kind of a immediate impact on our budgets and our work programs with the last couple of years, the weather events and stuff, or is it over the period? Is that yet to really impact on this sort of program?
Through the chair, I think that's a really good question. I think over the last 3 or 4 years, we've experienced very few severe coastal storm events, which may or typically include rainfall, flooding events as well, and some of the issues that creates. That's not to say that we couldn't have a series of storm events tomorrow and in future years. The work program itself accurately reflects the things we need to focus on for now. That's not to say that our focus may need to change following some of the storm events that I've just alluded to, and the evidence that sits around the climate change projections shows us we need to prepare for more regular, severe storm events, a combination of factors that sit there. I would add to that mix, though, the work that we've started in the coastal management planning space, working with our communities, helping to educate our communities around what they should expect, what they need to prepare for, the role of private landowners, the role of council, and some of our visioning of what might need to change going forward. If I was to gaze into the future, over the next sort of 5 to 10 years, I think some of the discussions we have in this forum will change, and there'll be discussions around the need for funding maybe of a different quantum with a different focus to be applied. But for now, I think the budget as it stands, like I say, is focused on the work that needs to be completed with the highest risk. And whilst that work's being completed, we have a good plan in place for engagement with our communities and mana whenua through the coastal management planning space. You'll be aware that there's some funding from this year for the next few years to speed up delivery of those coastal management plans. So you're going to hear more from me in time, speaking to what we've learnt in combination with communities and mana whenua around what's important, what we need to focus on, and it'll be a combination of managing assets that we currently own, with I guess, a little bit more discussion on preparedness for the future and what that looks like.
Thanks. Just, I won't speak to it, Mr. Chair, but just again to reiterate my acknowledgement to the team for the work that's been delivered. You go around any parts of Auckland and there's a lot of, and particularly in the coastal space, a lot of renewals happening, very high amenity, and as I said earlier, that's the sort of things that our communities actually notice about work that's done. So thank you.
Kapai. Now, there's no further questions. I'm going to open up for comments, and if there's no comments, I'm going to put the recommendation, because John's already acknowledged our staff with the mahi that you've done. So if there's no comments, I'm going to put the recommendation. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Ngā mihi kia koutou katoa, and also to you, Taryn. This is your first meeting as GM. Congratulations to your role.